They say history is written by the victors. But what about the fragments that never made it into the chronicles? The secrets that lived and died in peasant huts, whispered in barns, scribbled in margins of forgotten manuscripts. When we think of the Middle Ages, we picture castles, knights, and plague carts rolling through silent streets. But there's another story, a quieter one, hidden in the spaces between survival and desperation. It's the story of a war waged in shadows, not between kingdoms, but between humans and an enemy so small it could slip beneath a door and devour your life from the inside out. Rats. Not just vermin, but harbingers of death. Creatures that slithered through the very fabric of medieval existence, feasting on grain, spreading disease, multiplying faster than despair. In the century of the Black Death, they were more than a nuisance. They were prophecy made flesh. Every scratching sound in the dark was a warning that food might vanish, that sickness might come for your family. And yet, peasants fought back, not with armies or steel, but with cunning, patience, and something deeper, the raw instinct to endure when the world itself seemed to conspire against them. Imagine the year 1348. The air carries rumors of a plague. No prayer can stop. Rats dart along the edges of every street, slinking into houses like silent assassins. But in that darkness, something stirs, the simplest of solutions, older than kings. The cat. Not the pampered ornaments of noble courts, but lean, scruffy hunters with eyes like sharpened steel. These cats were more than pets. They were weapons, four-legged sentinels whose worth was measured not in beauty, but in blood spilled on the floorboards. A good mouser was a prize beyond gold. Records whisper of cats fetching sums that today would equal hundreds of dollars. People guarded them like relics. To steal one was not merely theft, it was treachery. Some towns kept lists, crude ledgers etched in ink, noting which cats had slain the most rats. One legendary mouser reportedly dispatched 50 in a single month, earning its owner not just admiration, but free ale at the tavern, a small feast in an age where famine always lingered at the threshold. Think about that for a moment. A cat so deadly it could buy you drink and bread. The original security system, silent, tireless, and loyal only to the hunt. But not all cats were born equal. The best mousers weren't sleek aristocrats lounging by noble hearts. They were stocky, short-tailed creatures with the wild glint of the hunter's eye, that unblinking, merciless stare that spoke of instincts honed on the edge of hunger. Peasants had ways to test kittens, subtle trials passed down through generations. A flick of a string, a whisper of movement. If the creature pounced without hesitation, it lived to serve. If it lounged and blinked slowly, useless. Another mouth to feed in a world where every scrap mattered. The medieval cat could not coast on charm. It needed a killer's resume, literally. Families locked them indoors at night, not out of love, but out of fear they might vanish into another household that promised warmer straw or better scraps. For in this silent war, a single mouser could mean the difference between survival and ruin. But cats were not the only soldiers in this hidden conflict. Enter the ferret, the sleek, muscular ghost that slithered where even cats could not follow. To look at one was to see something almost otherworldly, a living rope of muscle and teeth, built for the narrowest tunnels, the deepest burrows. Medieval peasants trained these strange creatures to hunt with a singular purpose: purge the darkness where claws could not reach. They became the secret weapons of granaries, slipping like whispers through the cracks of wooden walls, vanishing into the unseen labyrinths beneath the floor. Training a ferret was an art of patience and risk. These were not creatures of soft domestication, but sinews of wild instinct that had to be bent, not broken. A bell tied to its neck, a strip of cloth fluttering like a banner of control. These were the peasants' lifelines, fragile assurances that the little predator would return from the maze of shadows. And when it did, dragging death in its jaws, the household breathed easier, for a time. Imagine the terror of a rat colony at the scent of such a hunter. Panic rippling through the dark. Rats fleeing blindly into traps, into the waiting claws of cats poised like statues at every exit. A choreography of survival, orchestrated by hands calloused from toil, guided not by science, but by something older, the primal genius of necessity. Yet not every family could afford such living weapons. And so the poor turned to the earth itself, summoning defenses from root and leaf. strong-smelling herbs scattered like sigils of protection, mint, garlic, wormwood, mustard seed, a pungent wall against the tide of vermin. Mint leaves crushed and strewn across thresholds, their sharp perfume a signal that said, "You are not welcome here." Garlic cloves tucked into corners, exhaling their sulphurous warnings. Rags soaked in garlic juice dangling from rafters like primitive charms. Wormwood, bitter and unyielding, laid in places where rats might tread. The same plant that would one day lace up scent in the salons of poets was once the vanguard of peasant homes, a taste and scent so vile to vermin it turned back their tiny desperate armies. And then came the mixture, whispered in the margins of a 15th century text, mint, garlic, wormwood, mustard, bound with vinegar into a potion of repulsion. The very air heavy with its acrid hymn, a sensory curse that even hunger could not make the rats endure. Think about this. In an age without chemicals, without steel traps, without the arsenal of modernity, people fought back with nature's arsenal. The forest and the field became their laboratories, and every herb, every root was a weapon if you knew its secret name. But the story does not end with herbs and hunters. For beyond the clean simplicity of mint and claw lay a darker art, the craft of death itself. Rat poison, a practice so perilous it could turn the hunter into the hunted, the protector into the destroyer. There were no measured doses, no careful warning stamped on parchment. There was only desperation and the grim alchemy of survival. Arsenic scraped from pale mineral veins, ground to powder fine as dust. Hemlock, the same silent killer that ended the life of Socrates, crushed and mingled with honey. Even shards of glass, glittering like frost in the dim light, mixed into morsels to shred from within what teeth could not reach from without. This was pest control as witchcraft, whispered from mother to daughter, guarded like a family spell. One misstep, one careless hand, and the line between rat and child blurred in the darkness. There are records, chilling, fragile, of homes poisoned by their own design, of laws rising in trembling response to ban arsenic baits after the earth claimed too many innocent mouths. And still, the poisons flowed. Because hunger is an alchemist that makes monsters of necessity, because when grain is life and rats are famine on four legs, the line between salvation and sin disappears. Pause for a moment and consider this. In the shadows of cathedrals and castles, while kings schemed over thrones and crusades, carved rivers of blood across continents, the real battle for survival raged on dirt floors in the silent corners of homes. Not a battle sung by minstrels or etched in stained glass, but one fought in whispers, in claw marks, in the bitter scent of wormwood steeped in vinegar, a war that shaped the rhythm of peasant life as surely as any decree of crown or church. But this is only the beginning of the story. For if you think these measures were strange, if you think garlic charms and glass lace bait were the peak of peasant ingenuity, you have seen only the surface. Beneath it lies a world of rituals and devices, of noise and shadow, of illusions crafted to deceive the most cunning of foes. The question is not how far they went to survive, but what those choices reveal about the mind of an age we thought we understood. You've walked through the first layer of this hidden war, the claws, the teeth, the bitter taste of herbs steeped in desperation. But the deeper we go, the more the story begins to twist into something stranger. For when survival becomes an art, necessity births invention. And in the quiet corners of medieval Europe, among rafters blackened by smoke and earth floors worn by bare feet, people began to shape weapons out of ideas. Not steel, not stone, but sound, illusion, and fear. The chronicles rarely speak of it, perhaps because it feels too humble, too ridiculous to belong in the solemn scrolls of history. Yet there it is, scattered in marginal notes and strange little diagrams, sound as a shield. Imagine a barn at dawn. A man stands in the half-light, lifting a crude whistle carved from bird bone. He blows, and a sound rises, thin, piercing, a note that dances beyond the range of human hearing. The cats do not stir, the cows do not flinch, but deep in the shadows, tiny claws scurry. A rustle, a frantic squeal, and then silence, as the vermin flee the unseen storm. Medieval people believed that noise unsettled rats, that unpredictability was a weapon, and they weren't entirely wrong. Rats, sensitive to frequencies that slip past our dull human ears, found these sharp tones unbearable. So the peasants made their music of survival. Bone flutes, hollowed reeds, whistles carved with holes placed just so. They blew them in granaries before lifting the lids of grain bins, sending an invisible alarm rippling through the darkness. In some villages, there were even men whose task was to play these rat pipes, winding through storage houses like ghostly minstrels of pestilence. Think of what that must have looked like. A figure moving through the chill of an early morning, breath misting as the high keening sound of a whistle trembles in the air. No audience, no applause. Only the hope that the night's intruders are fleeing through cracks and crevices, driven by a sound no human heart can feel. And then there were the clangers, sheets of thin copper or iron hung from rafters, stirring when the wind whispered through the beams. They were simple things, crude charms against the gnawing tide. Every time the night air shifted, they clattered and sang their jagged song, breaking the silence into shards. Did it work? Perhaps. Rats dislike what they cannot predict, and these sudden metallic cries must have seemed like the breath of a waking predator. But imagine the soundscape of such a home. The constant discord of wind chimes forged for war, not beauty. The edge of madness humming in the background of every meal, every prayer. Noise as a weapon. The ancients believed words could shape reality, that sound itself held power over the unseen. Is it so different here? A family standing in the gloom, banging pots, stamping feet, shouting into the void, as if to summon some spectral guardian against the creeping dark. We laugh now, perhaps, but they weren't fools. They were improvisers in a theater where death was the audience and silence was a trap. Yet sound was only the beginning. From sound, they moved to shadow, to deception, to the oldest magic of all, fear. For what does a rat fear more than a predator's gaze? In the forests, it flees the owl's silent wing. In the fields, it trembles at the serpent's sinuous grace. And so the peasants carved their guardians, owls from wood, snakes from clay, figures of menace painted with care and crowned with feathers stolen from the hedgerow. They placed them in corners, on rafters, near the mouth of holes where the whiskered enemy crept. Watching, always watching. Picture it, a granary dimly lit by the glow of a tallow lamp. In the shadows and owl perches, still as death, eyes wide and pitiless. To us it is a carving, a crude charm. To the rat for one startled moment, it is doom incarnate. Did these wooden sentinels work? For a time, yes. For fear is quick and instinct older than thought. But rats learn. They test, they adapt. And when they find the owl's stare hollow, when they scent no rush of air from beating wings, they grow bold. The hunter becomes the jest, its painted feathers gnawed to splinters. And so the peasants learned to keep the illusion alive, moving their effigies from shadow to shadow, turning their homes into a shifting theater of false threats. Some even built contrivances more cunning still, hawks on hidden pivots that rocked when the wind sighed through a window, wooden serpents dangling on cords to sway with ghostly motion. Devices born of desperation, yet carrying an echo of something older, something ritualistic. For is this not the essence of magic? To craft a thing, to name it predator, and hope the world believes. But fear fades, hunger sharpens, and when the talismans failed, when the whistles grew hoarse, the peasants turned inward, to the body itself. Here the story dips into a darkness that smells of sweat and urine and something deeper, the belief that a fragment of self could ward away the vermin tide. Hair, clippings from combs packed into little cloth bundles and hung like amulets. Fingernails scattered in the corners of rooms as though each keratin crescent held a whisper of human dominion. And then, the urine, poured along thresholds soaked into rags that sagged from beams. A reeking barrier drawn from the intimate depths of flesh, a mark as primal as any beast's territorial spray. It sounds grotesque to modern ears. But pause, think. Rats are creatures of scent, readers of the invisible script written in oils and musk and ammonia. To them, the odor of humanity was not merely unpleasant, it was a proclamation. Predator dwells here. A warning old as time, signed in salt and sweat. There are even texts, brittle, foxed with age, that advise the use of male urine above female, claiming it strikes a sharper chord of terror in the rodent's soul. Some even counseled feasting on garlic before the offering, so that the reek might bear the sting of sulfur, the breath of something unholy. Was it madness? Or a logic so raw we've forgotten its shape? The peasants understood something we've smoothed away with chemicals and chrome, that survival is a dialogue between the body and the earth, spoken in scents and shadows, in whispers of blood and bone. And yet, even these rites of stench and secrecy were but another wall in an endless siege. For rats are hunger-given form. They do not reason, but they persist. So the peasants raise their defenses higher still, not with charms or poisons, but with architecture, an art older than Gothic arches, older than stone castles. The art of denial. If the rat could not be slain, it would be barred. So grain climbed skyward, swinging from beams and sacks like pendulums of hope. Tallow-greased poles stood like slick monoliths, crowned with platforms that gleamed with plenty beyond the grasp of claw. Chests sealed with resin and wax, lids clamped tight with iron bands, fortresses of bread and barley. Even the humblest home became a castle when famine crouched at the door, its battlements carved from pine and ash. Picture those storehouses, food swaying in the gloom, ropes humming under their burden, metal discs spinning like shields to turn back the climbing horde. An arms race of angles and surfaces, where every curve was a strategy, every slick sheen a moat against the besieging swarm. And still, the siege endured. For rats are cunning, they leap, they gnaw, they dream in the dark of banquets hung beyond their reach, and in that dreaming, they plot. So the peasants plotted too. Pits gaped in the earth, shallow mouths lined with clay slick as glass. The rat steps, slides, falls, claws scrabble, bodies tumble, the air filling with the frantic percussion of failure. Children peer down with wide eyes, laughter tangled with something crueler. The thrill of dominion, rare and fleeting. Sticks balanced over voids, bait poised like a dare, a trap masquerading as mercy. The game played out night after night, an echo of some deeper truth, that life in this world was always a precipice, always a gamble across a narrow beam above an unseen abyss. And yet, beyond the practical hum of these contraptions, beyond the stink of urine and the rustle of herbs, something stirs. A question, sharp as a rat's tooth. Why did they fight so hard? Why this theater of claws and whispers and charms carved in wood? Was it only hunger? Or did the rat become something more? A symbol, a shadow cast by fears too vast to name. In their furtive rustlings did the peasants hear the breath of chaos, the promise that order was a lie and the dark would always return. Perhaps, or perhaps it was simpler still, a mother guarding her child, a man guarding his bread, both waging a war whose songs would never be sung. But the strangest verse of that song is yet to come. For when every snare failed, when the owl's painted stare grew hollow and the last whistle fell silent, the peasants did something unthinkable. They crossed the final threshold, turned predator upon the pest, and found in its flesh the bitter taste of salvation. The war could not last forever, not when hunger sharpened its claws on both sides of the door. For the peasants, this was never just a struggle for comfort. It was a struggle for existence, for the fragile promise of tomorrow's bread. And so, when the defenses failed, when the granary's ropes sagged empty, when the last sack split under the gnawing teeth of shadows, they turned to the most ancient solution of all. They ate the enemy. You will not find this in the gilded pages of courtly chronicles. Kings did not dine on rats, but in the lean months when the snow sealed the fields in white and the world shrank to a circle of smoke around the hearth, the rat became meat. Coarse, bitter, but meat nonetheless. There are whispers of recipes, fragments tucked in the margins of medical texts and herbal guides. Skin it well, they counsel, for the pelt bears the stench of filth. Then boil. Always boil, for water was both shield and sacrament, a way to scour the unseen rot that clung to every sinew. Some would stew it with garlic and onions, if such luxuries remained. Others roasted it on spits over ash, watching the fat drip and spit like some parody of feast day lamb. But there is something older here, older than famine or necessity, something that shivers in the marrow of these acts. For to eat the rat was to invert the order of things, to seize the predator's crown from the brow of chaos itself. Imagine the silence in that low, smoke-choked hut as the first bite passed from hand to mouth. No songs, no laughter, only the crackle of fire and the quiet knowledge that the boundary between man and vermin had thinned, that the circle had closed. And yet, even this was not the strangest offering made upon the altar of survival. There were other whispers, darker, harder to pin in the net of reason. That in some places, in some winters, men sought not merely to destroy the rat, nor merely to consume it, but to bind it, to turn its gnawing hunger into an ally. In the shadowed corners of folklore, you will find these tales, of peasants capturing live rats, sealing them in clay jars, and burying them beneath the threshold of a barn. A sacrifice, they said, though not of blood. It was an imprisonment, a binding of the rat spirit itself, so that its kin would turn aside, fearing the unseen fetters of their king. The jars were never opened. They lay like seeds in the dark, heavy with the silence of something ancient and uneasy. And here is the question that lingers like smoke. Was this mere superstition? Or did the peasants sense something we have forgotten, that to kill is simple, but to command, to bend the will of the wild to human need, requires ritual? In this, perhaps, they were not so far from the magi and the alchemists, those hooded keepers of secrets who worked their wonders in the courts of princes. For is there not a strange kinship between a man bearing a rat beneath his doorway and another scrawling sigils in quicksilver under the gaze of a flickering lamp? Both sought dominion over chaos. Both spoke the language of fear. But if the rat was the foe, it was also the mirror. It thrived where man thrived, fed on his scraps, slept in his walls, walked the shadows of his footsteps. In a way, the rat was the perfect emblem of the Middle Ages, furtive, restless, gnawing at the edges of a fragile order. And like the age itself, it endured, for no charm could quell it, no trap could halt its tide for long. The rats were always there, whispering in the night, carrying in their slick fur the black seed of a greater horror yet to come. For in the rat's belly, unseen, the plague was already stirring. When it came like winter without thaw, like night without dawn. And then all the clanging charms, all the whistles and wooden owls, all the dangling sacks of grain were as nothing. Against that tide, the war of the peasants was no longer a game of noise and shadow. It was a dirge, a requiem for a world gnawed hollow from within. But that is another story, a story written in bones. And so when you think of the Middle Ages, do not picture only knights and castles, banners and swords. Picture instead the low smoke curling from a cottage roof, the hush of a granary at dusk, the faint, shrill cry of a bone whistle in the dark. Picture a world balanced on a thread and the teeth waiting to sever it. For in that silence, the rats are still listening. This completes the three-part series. Part 1, the herbs, charms, and first defenses. Part 2, sound, fear, and the art of deception. Part 3, eating the enemy, binding spirits, and the shadow of plague.